Hi, so I'm Jessica Rath, and I'm going to be talking about block stewards and native habitats in medians in LA today, a project that I worked with Julie Coffey, my colleague, in 2021 and 2022. We want to thank CNPS for inviting us to present, and we recognize that our work is on Tongva land in Los Angeles County. Our main question was, can we increase biodiversity and relationships with land through native forb seeding in the medians? And then our secondary questions were, how does species establishment vary based on environmental conditions in these individual medians? And then specifically, what species are easiest to establish in these places? What level of shade, watering, and soil amendment are necessary? And then how does site history influence the outcome of these seedings? So a median is the space between the parkway and the street, just to establish that fact. And then a forb is, herbaceous, non-woody, and non-grass. This seed palette is based on a species list from nearby Griffith Park, a wildland in our largest park in LA. And what is a block steward? So a block steward is this couple, for instance, who observed our process of doing the experiment and were already seeding non-native poppies, non-native forbs. They were familiar with forbs in their median. A native plant enthusiast who already wants to actually build a nursery for the neighborhood after working with us for about 9 months. And then ourselves. So I live in the neighborhood myself. Julie and I are both scientists. And we want to build connections in that community. So together we form a hub of information for essentially what is about a 10-block area in East Los Angeles. We're also interested in decentralizing power. We know that we don't actually know that much about these sites, and we are experimenting. We have just as many questions as the block stewards or our neighbors do. We're also interested in increasing curiosity with our neighbors. So we're building that curiosity together. And then together, once again, we want to decentralize power and have the knowledge be shared between us. The experiment specifically is to study the germination of native forb seeding in urban Los Angeles parkways or medians. The site is East Hollywood, and you can see the 4 sites circled in red. These are the 4 buildings, and then the medians outside of those buildings, and then there's the 4 plots. We also touched base with some different, mostly seed experts within the area, to connect that information to our neighbors and that work. And here again are our plot partners. We have a native plant enthusiast, we have the gardening landowner, we have one scientist, would be myself, and then we have tenant apartment owner / gardener relationship on one plot. So they're complex relationships. Just because a landowner owns the land doesn't mean they're the ones who really want to make the decision, and also our decisions affect the gardener and his livelihood. The experimental design was to test both a weeding treatment and watering treatments in these plots. And then our results were, there's a report on all the scientific results, and our emails are at the last of this. So if you want to see the scientific data, feel free to contact us. But in general, we had 3 species that came up well, which were failware spring, California goldfields, and California poppy. The broader implications for this are, well, we have some challenges, right? Forb seeding is different than planting shrubs, which is sort of the predominant thing that we do in these median areas. Parkways are ignored. They're also overused, or they're just used by humans. So they're a major interface with humans. Stakeholder relationships have to be built, and it takes time. So that's been evolving over 8 or 9 months. Just careful conversations, walking on the weekend, meeting our neighbors, talking to them. We also have this disbelief in biodiversity that can exist in those median areas. Is this little area worth anything, right, in terms of biodiversity? And we know from recent research that actually there is a significant, disproportionately large amount of biodiversity that can happen in patch habitat, even at this scale. Forbs themselves are strikingly beautiful. They surprise humans. They have seasonality that is shocking. They actually, set tenor for actually talking about the fact that we go into dormancy in August, July, August, and September, and we can notice that and talk to our neighbors about that. They also provide biodiversity, and then it's a seed in and leave it, so they have a great dispersal strategy. In site prep, we work together, we have community networking, and we share site history. Block by block design uses existing relationships, is not agency dependent, and connects folks to land. Once again, it's not private, it's public land, and we hope to encourage people's curiosity. Please feel free to contact us with the information for more information.
All right. Next up, increasing native species and urban ecosystem with Joanna Tang. Thank you.
Thank you for coming to listen to my talk. I am a PhD student studying restoration ecology at UC Santa Barbara, which is on the unceded ancestral homelands of the Chumash people. And I think that's important to note because when I think of restoration, I really think of restoring people with the place that they're at and the plants that they live with, which is why I'm excited to be at this conference. And when we think of, in particular, when I think of doing restoration, I'm focusing on urban restoration. So doing restoration in urban ecosystems. And one might ask, why would we focus on urban ecosystems when there may not be a lot of plants in urban ecosystems, although in the last talk, maybe there are plants. But I will tell you that there are a lot of people in cities. And so when we are thinking of doing restoration in these places, we see that we want to actually capitalize on the amount of people in cities. So the majority of people live in cities, and in the United States, 83% of the human population lives in cities. So there's a lot of people, and so that could be a lucrative place to foster relationships between people and the place they're in. But when we historically think of places where we have tried to foster a relationship between people and plants, like national parks, those actually are not fostering relationships between people and the plants right around them, right? We think of national parks as far-off wilderness areas where people go over there, learn something about the plants, and then come back. That's not really the reconnection that we want to have with the landscape. In addition, national parks are only accessible to a certain subset of people. So some studies have shown, Also, I wanted to note, backing up to cities, cities are also a huge place of biodiversity of humans. And so we can see in LA, there's a lot of different ethnicities in LA, versus the ethnicities that are accessing national parks is very different. So this study shows that the majority, 92% of people who visit national parks are white Americans. And because only a subset of the human population are experiencing nature in these national parks, only a subset of humans are interested and invested in preserving and conserving native plants. So we can see here the majority of people working in conservation and preservation organizations are white Americans. And you can see how the diagram contrasts greatly with the LA census diagram. And so I really think of cities as a really great opportunity to involve more people in place-based stewardship, fostering relationships with the plants in their own cities. And so that's what UC Santa Barbara has been doing for the past 40 years. We have a lot of restoration sites around campus, and we work a lot with students and with local community members and volunteers to steward those lands. And so you can see here that almost half of the hours contributed to stewardship work, so like weeding and planting, all sorts of cleanup activities. Most of those hours are contributed by students in red and volunteers in green. And in this picture are just a couple of the students I've been able to work with as I'm restoring the lands around UC Santa Barbara. Here's a longer list of people who I've worked with. And when I was looking at all these hours and all these people contributing to getting their hands dirty on the land, I was wondering, well, what is the actual ecological impact of all of that work? And so what we did was vegetation surveys of all of the different restoration sites around campus. And you can see some of these orange parcels are larger, and some of these orange parcels are really small and really embedded within the urban matrix. And you might think of those places as very unnatural or really hard to restore. But we found that with a lot of really good community engagement, those small parcels actually have the highest amount of native diversity. And so we can actually do restoration in our cities, and that is my encouragement to you, where we can reconnect people, place, and plants. It starts with you, it starts with you in your backyard and in your home. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Mindy Trask, Restoring Coastal Prairie in San Luis Obispo County.
There. In 2018, Caltrans completed a 3-mile realignment of Highway 1 in northern San Luis Obispo County. And with that came the restoration of the goal to restore 20 acres of the old highway into natural coastal prairie habitat, and about 60 acres of restoration for areas that were temporarily disturbed due to construction activities. Two of the most successful restoration treatments were transplanting wetland plants from natural areas into the restoration areas, and then also using soil that was salvaged from the new highway, where the new highway is going to go. They salvaged that soil and reused it in restoration areas. This slide shows the transplants in one of the wetland areas, and you can see the grid pattern where those sod and plugs were placed, and the filling in over time, and it's doing great. There's great species diversity in these transplant areas. This is a wetland site. There are drier wetland sites in this prairie area. We call them coastal prairie wetlands, and they have subsurface hydrology. You can see this area has surface hydrology. The areas that had the subsurface hydrology wetlands where we did the transplants didn't do as well. That could be a function of drought. There's been a lot of drought in the past 10 years, 20 years. It could be due to problems with the irrigation. It could have been due to that the transplant species just don't do as well in that drier habitat. They were facultative wetland plants, whereas in this site there are more of the obligate wetland plants. So there are many reasons that could have contributed to that. The soil salvage did really well in increasing native species diversity in the areas that were temporarily disturbed, where we replaced the soil in the old roadbed. There was no increase in native species diversity there. There's lots of reasons for that, and this is the biggest reason. Invasive species control was, to say that it was a problem is an understatement out at this site, and probably in any restoration project, it's going to be your biggest challenge. Caltrans, over a 3-year restoration period, tried many different things. We sent out crews to spray and hand pull monthly for 3 years, and then also spot spray. And then also we tried goat grazing. I don't know if you were out there at that time, but 400 goats, we did it twice. It took them like 6 weeks each time, and that wasn't very successful. We wanted to do control burn, but Caltrans relied on CAL FIRE for that, and right when conditions were ideal for the control burn, they had real fires to contend to, so that didn't happen. And then we finally, near the end of the 3rd year, had to resort to broad herbicide treatment and then reseeding, using drill seeding this time with natives, and that just happened about a year ago, so we don't have any results of that. Lessons learned: if you're going to do a local seed collection, start it early. It takes longer than you think it's going to take to get your native plant collections. It's just plan on more time. Pay close attention to grading in the elevations and wetland areas. We had some issues during construction that nobody really realized until a year afterwards, that even microtopography can make a big difference when you have subsurface hydrology. Drip irrigation, let's see. Reusing salvage topsoil, reuse it quickly. Don't let it sit around. Some of the reason that it might not have done so well in restoring the old roadbed is because it took a while before that was ready to be used, and so it could have composted in the meantime. If you're transplanting rhizomatous wetland plants, use larger, we call them pieces of sod like you would with your lawn, so the 1 foot square ones did much better than the little plugs that we tried. Drill seeding is great if you can do it because it gets really good seed soil contact. Alternatives to herbicides can be challenging. The successes, this project had way more successes than we had failures. There were 3 undersized culverts on Highway 1 before the project, and now there's these 3 large floodway spanning bridges reconnecting lagoon habitat for tidewater goby and for elephant seals. And like I talked about the topsoil salvage, and even though we are having considerable trouble with the weeds, the restoration results are showing, the monitoring results are showing really good trends in achieving our performance standards. About 8.3 acres of wetlands on site were restored, and Caltrans is going to be doing more. And if you want a job as a botanist, come to Caltrans, see me.
All right, next up we have Mariel Boldis, protecting threatened and endangered plants with the Native Plant Program.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Mariel Boldis, and I'm an environmental scientist in the Native Plant Program with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and my goal here today is to provide you all with a better understanding of what our program does to protect threatened and endangered plants, put some faces to names, and hopefully start more conversations with you all so our program can better serve your community. So to start, the department has 3 main programs at headquarters that does work related to native plants. And through information exchange, we help support regional staff across the state that does a lot of the ground truthing work. So because our programs at headquarters are important hubs for information, we'll briefly go over them. So CNTDB houses all of our rare plant data and is honestly made possible by all of your contributions. We also have VegCamp, which does fine-scale mapping of vegetation across the state. And then, of course, there's us in the Native Plant Program, and we focus on research, management, permitting, and outreach of over 200 threatened, endangered, and rare plants that are protected under the California Endangered Species Act and the Native Plant Protection Act. So, who are we in the Native Plant Program? We are self-proclaimed plant nerds, and our program has more than doubled in the last year. So now we have staff in more specialized roles, and of course some names you may recognize, like Jeb and Sherilyn, whom you may have interacted with in the last 10 years. And so while we all have a different focus, our work intersects a lot of the time. So to illustrate how we work together, we're going to start with our program's role in listings. So someone submits a petition to the Fish and Game Commission, which then gets sent to us for review. About 90 days later, the commission evaluates our recommendation, and if they decide that the plant should be listed, or should be a candidate for listing, this kicks off a 1-year status review, where tribal notification and stakeholder engagement happens. And during this time, the plant is also protected. At a subsequent public meeting, the commission takes all of this information and decides if the plant should be listed as threatened, endangered, or if a listing is just not warranted. So once a plant is listed, it's added to my queue for a 5-year review. And so the idea here is to evaluate the conditions of the original listing to see if, it should still be listed. And if there's any new information, it's all summarized in a report to the commission and presented at a public meeting. So it doesn't always happen, but if we do recommend a status change, the 5-year review becomes the petition and it would go through the listing process. So just to recap, know that the department's role in this process is to do petition evaluations, 1-year status reviews, and 5-year reviews. And the commission is the decision maker. So all listed species require permits the authorized take, which allows for the possession of plants. And so our team will issue free permits for research or management projects, as well to collect listed plants in the field. We also have a new team, a new recovery team, that is focused on building or developing the framework for recovery plans for listed species. And so this new process will involve tribal consultation and opportunities for stakeholders to participate. So once a recovery plan is developed, organizations can use it to implement recovery actions. And to see if these actions actually work, we would do another 5-year review, and if we recommend a status change, then it would go through the listing process again. So my takeaway here is that we have CISA as a tool to help enable change, and it provides an opportunity to develop ecological solutions together. So what else do we do? We also monitor all sorts of listed and rare plants on CDFW managed properties, and depending on project objectives, we'll do project consultation and collaborate on management and outreach and so much more. So so overall, our program is a platform with tools to help protect listed plants and their habitat. And I also want to let you know that we are hiring a scientific aide for the native plant program. So if you are interested and are in the Sacramento or Yolo counties, we are hiring. Come visit us at our table.
Next up, we have Heidi Petersen, Shuttles for Sustainability.
Hi all, thank you very much. I am not a plant person. Well, I'm a plant lover, but I'm actually a library page in the city. I have been hiking and backpacking and camping all over the world. And one of the hardest places to do it is one of the first places I learned to do it, here in California. I love the Sespe Wilderness. It's a wonderful place to be. I can't get there. I'm a terrible driver. I don't have a car. It would cost me hundreds of dollars. I can take a train as far as Ventura, and then I can try and bike some scary, scary roads. But I can go camping at Carpinteria State Beach. That's right by Amtrak. That's great. But you don't know these things unless you try. And so I'm here basically to just talk about some of the ways transportation and conservation are related. So here we see one of the super blooms. I think this is Aliso Canyon, which ended up ruining the traffic patterns for this whole town. And a lot of these plants got trampled because people were just pulling off the road and wandering around. We have trails for a reason. The other here is the number of days where Yosemite had worse smog than LA. Or these are days where where national parks had air quality worse than some of the biggest cities in the world. 77 in Yosemite. I don't recognize all those Joshua trees. 37. I don't recognize them all offhand. Probably some of you guys do. So we also can help the plants by reducing the number of cars going into this area. Electric vehicles help, but there's also problems of tire and particulates and brake particulates that come off and end up filling. San Francisco Bay shows a large amount of those types of, those are the largest contributors to runoff in the area. As Joanna Tang made an excellent point about urbanization and the population representations, here's more about that. This is how many national park visitors are the representation. So you can see here, white people, way more represented in national parks. Hispanic, Black, Asian, and American Indian, way less. And isn't that sad? 6 in 10 residents here in California live in park-poor neighborhoods. So getting people out of these park-poor neighborhoods and to their nearby park matters. The lowest income Californians are the ones who have the most to gain from parks and are the least likely to own a car. The 61% of 18-year-olds in the US had a driver's license. That's almost 40% of the new college entrants who don't have a way to reliably get to a park right now. And the numbers are decreasing consistently. Everybody knows, more nature lovers, more protection for nature. So newer participants are more likely to be female, younger, living in an urban area, and more ethnically diverse, which also translates into less likely to have a car. Black, Latin, and Asian communities are 3 times more likely to live, or less likely to live near parks and open spaces as white communities. So yeah, more reasons to do that. So here are some programs that other people are doing that can make a difference. King County Metro, Seattle, has increased access through Trailhead Direct, which is buses to their nearby hiking and parks areas. The Sierra Club Minneapolis chapter mapped all of the places nearby that they can get to by bus. They just made it quick, easy, it's a resource just. Portland, just marking parks on their transit maps. Chicago is connected, they have a new Indiana Dunes National Park. They connected the L to it. They have a train going to, and that again, just takes kids from Chicago, find out, they can go on a quick train ride. They don't need their parents. They can go visit some dunes along the river. So you get places like the Hudson Valley, which are putting a bike touring organization plans. So this is more about how it's bad when plants get trampled and a lot of traffic gets stored. All right, sorry, I'm gonna go really fast. Muirwood's shuttle started in 2005, accounted for 13% of park visitors. It helped, there were huge problems with erosion, safety, and congestion issues. It got up to 20% in a few years. Here's a chart of how many people are using the shuttle. Samuel P. Taylor State Park was one of my inspirations because one of the first times I went there, one of my friends biked there. I didn't know you could go camping by bike. And it was originally a place where you could camp by train, way before it was a state park. So the day use lot fills up. There's a bus you can take there now, but nobody knows about it because it's not marked on the map. So it's literally just a public education campaign. Here are some places around California that are already having doing different projects. Big Basin State Park, it's right here. How do we get there? The Great Redwood Trail, turning an old train track into bike and hiking, Appalachian Trail style. There's a lot of grants through the recreation economy for rural communities and outdoor recreation legacy partnership. And these are all well-funded federal programs you can use to try and get money for your project. So, yeah, please, thank you.
All right, keeping the mix going, we have post-fire restoration at the Bolsa Chica Ecological Reserve with Haley Heesch.
All right, so we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about post-fire restoration at the Bolsa Chica Ecological Reserve. And I'm with the UC Irvine Center for Environmental Biology, and this is actually an aerial view of what this site looked like after the fire. I would like to take this time to acknowledge that this study site did take place on the traditional lands of the Tongva and Achuman tribes. All right, so back in 2020 is when this fire occurred and burned 62 acres of the Bolsa Chica Mesa. And so although this was an extremely fortunate event, it did kind of provide a blank slate for restoration. Previously, this site was made up of non-native invasive grasses and non-native forbs. And so we got together with the Bolsa Chica Land Trust and kind of brainstormed different ways we could restore this site. And so we wanted to incorporate some of the local coastal sage shrubs, CSS, that were located nearby in the reserve, and also look at the use of native bunch grasses and how we can incorporate that in the restoration of this site. And so we kind of came up with a few different questions we had in mind when restoring the site. So the first one we wanted to look at was how the use of herbicide affects the restoration efforts. Secondly, we wanted to look at how the difference in coastal sage shrubs and grasses, how they differed in terms of survival and growth. And thirdly, we wanted to see if adding native forb seeds to these container plants, if that had any sort of effect in more natives, and also if we were able to suppress the amount of non-natives. And so we had a 10 replicate block design. This is an example of what one block looks like. And within each block, we have our different treatment types. So in yellow, we have the plots that were not treated with any herbicide. And in the purplish blue, we have the ones that were treated with herbicide. And the ones with the little dots are the ones that we added our native forb seeds. And then our CSS shrubs are the ones that are on your right. And then our grasses were placed on the left. And so what we found is on your left is our non-native species, and on our right is our native species, and on the bottom is our herbicide treatment, and we're looking at mean number of natives. And so what we found that the use of herbicide did in fact limit the growth of non-natives, which was great. One non-native that we had a really hard time with at this site was the wild radish. And this is important because removing these non-natives gave way and allowed natives to actually take their place. One being a rare plant, Central Media Perea. So it was great to see those kind of flourish when we were able to open up these spaces for these plants. And then our second question was looking at how coastal sage shrubs compared to our native grasses. And we found that they tended to do a lot better than our native grasses. And one interesting thing to note too is we didn't find that the use of herbicide had an effect on the container plants. And one reason we kind of hypothesized that the grasses didn't do as well is a lot of the local wildlife tended to were drawn to eating the grasses. So that was probably why they didn't do as well as the shrubs. And thirdly, when looking at if the addition of the native forb seeds had any impact, we did find that it did increase the amount of native species, which was great. The seeds that we planted did in fact do well. But we did not find that adding these native forb seeds were able to suppress the amount of non-natives at our plots. But we do kind of see a very, very slight trend that the seeded plots might be having a small effect, but nothing significant to report. And so some things to consider after following a fire event was at this site we did find that the use of herbicide was a great tool in limiting the amount of non-natives that grew back. At this site particularly, we found that native shrubs tended to do a lot better than our native grasses. And thirdly, when restoring the site, using native forb seeds helped increase the amount of natives we found. And I just want to say a big thank you to everyone that worked on this project, and thank you very much.
All right, next up we're going to talk about restoring our forests and storing carbon with Lester Lubetkin. Lester.
Which button is it? Thank you very much. Lester Lubetkin with the El Dorado chapter, California Native Plant Society. I was going to talk about the Caples Ecological Restoration Project, which was primarily prescribed burn, meadow restoration, and some efforts at improving aspen stands up in a in a mixed conifer, upper elevation mixed conifer on the El Dorado National Forest, and then how that project fit within the carbon neutral pledge that our chapter had put forward. One of the big issues that you can see in the picture in the lower is just the dense understory and a lot of fuels that had built up within the stands, the prescribed burn. One of the concerns was loss of or damage to some of the legacy pines, the really large conifers that were there, both kind of Ponderosa Jeffrey pine as well as sugar pine. The project itself is located south of Lake Tahoe, near Carson Pass and the Kirkwood area, for those that are familiar with it. And so the chapter was really active, along with Sierra Forest Legacy, in soliciting and coordinating volunteers that helped with removing the ladder fuels adjacent to the large legacy pines. We went through training for chainsaw training, worked in removing some of the large debris and limbs that had collected at the base of some of those large legacy pines. All right. Worked real closely with a fire crew from the El Dorado National Forest. The project itself was put together by the El Dorado Forest, and the fire crews were the ones that were going to be actually doing the prescribed burn. Our role really was to try and facilitate and make sure that prescribed burn was able to take place. And then after kind of removing some of the ladder fuel right around the large legacy trees, then we had additional volunteers that helped raking the forest. We were removing some of the debris and the needle cast and bark that's sloughed off and sitting at the base of these large legacy conifers. And so we had quite a few days of folks coming out, raking around those trees, removing that, so that when the prescribed burn occurred, it's going to be a broadcast burn, fire just on the ground, but didn't want to girdle those large conifers. You can kind of get a sense, though, of proud volunteers looking at their work. We raked and treated around about 200 trees and over about 100 acres, large variety of different volunteers that participated in the project. This was all done in 2019. At the same time, that same year, our chapter entered into a carbon neutral pledge where we were committing to try to add no greenhouse gases to the atmosphere from the chapter's activities. We identified our carbon footprint in 2019, which dropped considerably, probably similar to a lot of other chapters with the pandemic. So we had about 7 tons of CO2 equivalent. We estimated was our contribution, the chapter's contribution to the atmosphere. So we wanted to look at what about the activities that we are doing. Let's see if I can. The things that we are doing that are offsetting those impacts from our activities. And so looked at what about this project that we were involved with, of what kind of carbon sequestration from 1 year of annual growth of those large legacy pines and conifers that we were protecting. So I'm going to zip through, maybe. So we looked at the annual growth of the large trees, looking at kind of a growth ring, height of the tree. And then one of the factors, apologize, I give up. One of the factors, anyways, was that a lot of the growth is not just in the bole of the tree, but also in the limbs, in the roots, in the needles and whatnot. And so came up with, using various factors, that we we had protected about, or reduced, sequestered about 5.7 tons of CO2 equivalent, which was not quite our annual output from the chapter's activities, but went a long ways towards it. And what I was going to try and show in this image, the Caldor fire then came and burnt within that same general area. And what you see circled in red, that was the Caples prescribed burn area. And you can see that the activities and having the prescribed burn there was really able to reduce the mortality. The red is where there's mortality, tree mortality, near 100%. And the blue was where the fire went through. So anyways, with that, just encourage other chapters to look at things that they're doing that might be reducing and meeting our carbon footprint, the effort at reducing our carbon footprint. Thank you.
All right, next up we're going to hear about Sandhill restoration with John Balawejder. Is John here? Great.
Well, hello, you all. So who loves native plants? Yeah, let's hear it. Come on. Okay. Somebody told me I should do that so that you'd pay attention to me. Now, if I can only keep your attention. Okay, so, sorry. Okay, I've been doing a project in the Scotts Valley region of over the hill here. It's a sandhill restoration, okay? So I've written this thing, so I'm going to read it. I'm drawn to the odd, the different, outliers. So when a friend suggested I look over his parcel in the Santa Cruz Sandhills for a redo, I was, yes, intrigued. I'm continually fascinated by the various botanical outliers. The Caliente Range above the equally extravagant Carrizo Plain. The high pampas of Ecuador, bromeliads, calceolaria, weird puyos, passion flowers. Equatorial mountains of elevation and sweeping, of multiple and mixed ecotones, each arising out of the interplay of elevation and sweeping Amazonian rains. Northern California's Klamath Knot with its barely decipherable botanic and geologic histories. And so, the Santa Cruz Sandhills, my local outlier, a geologic and geomorphic anomaly, arising out of the ocean by the great struggle between the Pacific and North American plates about 15 million years ago. Now, sand chaparral and pine parkland. Home to rare creatures, Kincaid's solitary bee, an odd creature that never sees any of its own bees. It drops an egg hatches by itself, nobody sees anybody. Odd little creature. The milletid bee, Sandhills robber fly, flesh flies, the dotted blue butterfly, the kangaroo rat, the Mount Hermon June beetle, the Zayandi band-winged grasshopper. You can see that this is a rare environment. Okay, starting out on this project, my overactive mind projected the difficulties of planting in sand. I mean, young plants in sand. My clients giving me big bucks and my work shriveling up in the summer heat and all that. Sand? I needed a scheme, a plan on top of a design. My work, my architecture demands that my installations are what I call landscape worthy. It won't be sufficient that my native plant reintroduction simply survive. I need it to thrive. It's a front yard in a pretty Tony neighborhood, and it will need to look the part. My usual plan for my native plant installations is to use overhead watering. I find this is the best method, and that way I can mimic summer rains. And in that way, remember, landscape worthy, I can strive for a kind of extended spring look, early Juneism, as it were. Still, in a project like this, I need to balance what is in effect an extended inflorescence period with the usual dry season capacity, especially relevant to these sand-adapted species and some species, to complete the life cycle to viable seeding. I mean, I want this project to continue on itself. I want it to reseed itself. And what are these subspecies? Okay, I get to play with Latin now. So bear with me, my Latin may be different than yours. Although, okay, so we'll start with the Latin. I've listed just a few here. I'm going to start with the hard ones. Pseudo-Gnathophilium beniolens. Anybody? Pearly everlasting, you win. Carethrogene phylagenifolia. Asters? Did I hear asters? Okay, this is an easy one. Eriogonum nudum, variety decurrens. Buckwheat. Achillea millefolium. Come on, you all know that one, right? Yeah. Lupinus albifrons, bush lupin. Scrophularia californica. Kind of rhymes nice, eh? Scrophularia. Okay, Escultia californica, but special varieties. Rosa californica, so the same special varieties. Salvia spathacea. Cicericium bellum, love that one. Okay, Rhamnus californica. Uh-oh, now we got trouble. It's not Rhamnus anymore. I don't know what it is, but all those years of me studying Latin and getting all these names right, now I'm like, my old age isn't going to turn out very well. Okay, and now, where to get these plants? Good fortune here in Santa Cruz. Central Coast Wilds. And I know some of you are out there. Where are you? Okay. I've been buying from and prodding Josh Fodor for decades now. Their expert staff includes the queen of the seeds, as it were, Ellen. Ellen? Seriously, she is. How fortunate. Her expertise comes across clear and distinct. She's my Yoda. So it starts, as in literally plant starts. I place my order in August for a March delivery. They go and harvest the seed. They put everything together for me. When they finally arrive, they're fine-tuned, some in long cones, supporting nascent long roots. Others, surface rooters, come in 2 or 4-inch pots. Manzanita and Rhamnus, it's not Rhamnus anymore, I find in 5-gallon. Roses, black and hummingbird sage in 1 gallon. I time installation to capture the end of the rainy season, but past last frost date, early March. I reset the previously established for lawn water system. I adapted to my use, for giving it the capacity for an occasional summer rain. I kind of set it up for maybe once a week when I first plant, and then for the summer, once every 2 weeks. Okay, then I have my favorite forklift rock jocks. Place hand-picked Sierra salt and pepper boulders as erratics. Placed just where I ask. Please, just 7 degrees to the left. And now, tilt it back a little bit so I can put some sand underneath it. Just right. Okay. They tip my boulders. I tip them cash. I really do think the guys love to deliver to me so they can practice their art, which is actually an art. I mean, 4,000-pound boulders right on the dot, up a hillside. Those guys are great. Central Coast wilds. And still, on it comes, small meshes of medium-sized Sonoma fieldstone rocks set in gravel beds to mimic a wash. Larger Sonoma fieldstone borders define the top area of my planting hillside, dividing it from the lower pathway of a vegetable garden bed that I've set above, with citrus above that, and an odd circular bed of succulents, just for fun. Okay, I plant singles, like manzanitas and coffeeberry, rhamnus. Lupin bushes as singles. I use erratic Fibonacci's elsewhere. I set 2 patches of yarrow, black sage next to lizardtail, a long string of hummingbird sage along a pathway. High above, amid the Sonoma fieldstone boulders, a large patch of wild roses. Streaking and curving down the center are cream yellow poppies, ending in a flurry of pearly everlasting. This is the fun part, the design becoming real. It required several runs with hula hose to remove the original base of plants, which are sometimes called weeds. I don't know, it's a little derogatory, isn't it? Okay, hula hose are notorious for being pains in the butt to use. In the sand, it just swoops right through. Everything grows remarkably fast. Ellen and Central Coast Wild's timing is perfect, and we are all in sync, me and my plant friends. I gain a deeper understanding and respect for their adaptations to this inclement environment. Unseen, but now activated, is the underpinning of mycorrhizobials, fungal and mold communities. All this a part of that deeper mystery, which is sand and the sandhills. Am I running out of time? Anyway, the sandhills environment is something that's well worth visiting. It's over in the Henry Cowell State Park in Santa Cruz. And go in there in the springtime sometime, and there's giant coastal ponderosa pines and just the variety of many of the plants that I described. Okay, thank you.
All right, next up we have Moises Perea-Vega on wildfire safety and healthy habitats. Moises?
Hi, my name is Moises Perea-Vega. I am from UCI Nature, and I will be presenting on the UCI Ecological Preserve Defensible Space Demonstration Project. So this experiment was done on the land of the ancestral territory of the Ashaman and Tongva peoples. Wildfires are becoming increasingly common in Southern California, and with so many residential areas near these natural places, there's a real risk of harm to the people living there. Thankfully, there are plenty of regulations to help minimize this threat. One of these regulations being fuel modification zones. So a fuel modification zone is the space in between wild areas and urban settings in which the risk of fire is decreased by replacing the existing plants with those that have a lower fire risk, or by getting rid of the plants entirely. This is often leads to lowered biodiversity and reduced ecological value. So our goal was to create a fuel modification zone in which we can lower the risk of fire, but maintaining or even increasing the ecological value. So we did this by collecting over 1,500 cactus pads of coastal cholla and coastal prickly pear, since these two species have a high moisture content and are a relatively low fire risk. In addition to this, we seeded various forbs that are native and have been approved by the OC Fire Authority to be a low fire risk. And this was done just to raise the general biodiversity of the area. So our experiment takes place over at the UCI Ecological Preserve, just near UCI campus. The preserve is 60 acres large, and it is next to University Hills, which is a housing community home to several UCI professors. Normally, this area that's in the square is mowed down, but we decided to set up a couple of experimental plots to try out our new kind of fuel mod zone. So there are two things on our mind when we were setting up these fuel mod zones. The first one was, what can we do to help set up these sites more efficiently? And secondly, is it possible to create a fuel mod zone without sacrificing habitat value? Here we have a graph showing our planting arrangement that we were trying to use, the few large versus several small. Our idea being that one would be beneficial to the establishment of our cactus pads and the health and growth and survival of them. So the figure on the right is one of our plot maps where the top shows are several small 12 clumps of 4 cacti, the squares being prickly pear and the circles being cholla. The bottom shows are a few large with the 3 larger clusters of 16 cacti. Now, we didn't actually find any major trends between the planting arrangement and the health of our cacti, but throughout the study, we found a lot of other interesting things. So the graph on the left shows the number of new cactus pads after 1 year of growth, and the dark blue on the graph is the cholla, and as you can see, there was a significantly higher amount of new cactus pads after 1 year of growth. However, we found that there was a 10% higher survival rate of the coastal prickly pear. We had a couple of irrigated plots set up, and we found that our irrigated plots genuinely had larger plants than our non-irrigated ones. When it came to maintenance costs, this is where we found the biggest difference in terms of the planting arrangements. We used herbicide, we hand weeded, and we used the weed eater since these are the more common methods of weed control. And when it came to herbicide and hand weeding, there was very little difference, but weed eating, we found a big difference because this is done usually later in the season where the weeds are taller, mature, not yet dispersed to seed. And we found that the weeds would tower over our cactus pads, making it hard to find where our small clumps were. And that slowed us down a lot. So we did a lot of things to help establish the sites, and like I mentioned before, we added native seed, and we found that if you add native seeds, you're going to get a bunch of native plants, and that's just a great direct benefit. But the main thing that we found was that the cactus moisture content for the prickly pear was consistently higher than that of the native shrubs found in this area, which is the CSS area. So this graph shows the blue line being the prickly pear, and it follows the same trend as the CSS throughout the year in terms of moisture content, but it's just significantly higher than the shrubs. So the key takeaways that we found from this study was that the planting arrangement had little to no effect on the health of our cacti, but it did have an effect on our maintenance costs, in which we preferred the few large since it's just easier to maintain. And in terms of creating a fuel mod site, we think that it is totally viable to create one of these fuel mod sites using native plants and providing ecological value to things like the coastal cactus wren that depend on the coastal prickly pear. So thank you very much for listening, and thanks to everyone who helped make this possible.
All right, next up, Joe DeWolf is going to talk to us about the fact that state funding does boost plant conservation seed banking efforts.
There we go.
Yeah, hi everybody. What a concept. Funding helps us do stuff. It's great. I didn't realize I got it. What's that? Yes, ma'am. Okay, yeah, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to present on California Plant Rescue. Has anybody here, I'm sure a lot of people have heard about California Plant Rescue. Awesome. So for those of you who don't, California Plant Rescue is a group of collaborating institutions whose main goal is to collect seed from rare plants and bank them, and then in some cases to also have living collections in the case where you can't store seeds, you know, of certain like recalcitrant species like oaks and things like that. By the way, I'm Joe. I'm from San Diego Botanic Garden, and we are just one of the main participants of CAPER. Okay, so CAPER started with a gap analysis by Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden, California Botanic Garden, where they were looking, you can look at the numbers here, where they were looking at the percent of rare plants that were seed banked. So obviously the federal and state listed ones were pretty good, but if you look at the 1B taxa, 2B and so on, they weren't very, very great, right? So this was an incredible gap analysis by these three, and it kind of was what started California Plant Rescue, which I'll call CAPER, just for short. So this funding origin story here, and by the way, I should mention that I'm new to CAPER personally, and so I wasn't a part of all of this, and so I'm sure a lot of you are, and I'd be really interested to hear and see how many people in here were a part of this funding effort. Specifically, you got Shannon, Brett, and Naomi, but then there was a big lobbying effort by CNPS, which helped us get this $3 million in funding, which went towards the seed banking I'm going to be talking about. Was anyone here at CNPS part of that lobbying? I'm just curious. Very good. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to talk on this issue that I wasn't a part of. I think it's some sort of like hazing, new guy hazing effort that they're putting me through. Just send the new guy up there. Yeah. So hopefully I'm getting the story straight. So here's the breakdown. So seed collections, obviously, 2.5 million were given for the seed collections. And then obviously, in addition to just seed collections, you need infrastructure, right, to get all this done, to have the staff, to have the equipment and the seed banks and everything like that. So we, along with all of the institutions, we've done a great job of collections, but this funding was instrumental in helping establish, especially, I mean, I can speak for myself at San Diego Botanic Garden. This funding was really huge for us to kind of develop our seed bank and conservation program and everything like that. So there's a lot of great stuff that is happening. And Katie Heineman did a recent gap analysis that there's a lot of great numbers which are just showing the successes of this program. So here you can see before CAPER, obviously the blue. After it was started is the green, so there's a definite increase in the collections of these 1B species. And then the money comes in and there's the red, right? So just a general increase since CAPER started, and then a greater efficiency since all the money came in. Oh, there we go. And we got a little ways to go, obviously, but we're getting there. So these charts show, I think you kind of want to look at the purple and then like the golds, the two golds, kind of before CAPER and after CAPER, and then the darker gold is, again, since the money started coming in. So you can see there was a lot more collections made since the money came in and really allowed us to make all these collections. In addition to just straight numbers of species, there were a lot of geographical gaps in collections. And it makes sense, because, the majority of institutions are, I guess you can see, kind of like Sacramento, Bay Area down. Obviously, there's some great institutions above that, but typically speaking, we're all doing collections in our own area. So there was these collection gaps. You can see before and after here the improvement of collections since this state funding came in. There it is. Okay, and then additionally, the percent per eco-region here of collections in a seed bank. So you can see before and after, obviously just another huge difference. Not even any blues left. So every one of the eco-regions have at least 50%. And then Katie just also did some interesting gap analyses, I think, of just kind of why certain things are collected or not collected, right? And so this is just kind of interesting data to share. And I guess, sorry, the formatting kind of, I guess, was messed up a little bit there, but certain ones were improved, obviously, and I'm sure she can talk about for a long time why that is, but I'm sure rarity, maybe we're always collecting things that are just more common, things that are more easy to get to, things that are prettier maybe. Certainly, there's certainly some like collection biases, so there was a lot of improvement in the types of plants that were collected as well. And then here's just another demonstration of the increases in certain families and certain families that were already pretty well collected. And then here's some things I can speak on personally. So San Diego Botanic Garden, we were the recipient of some of these CAPER funds. And so one of the species we've been working on is Quercus cedrosensis, which occurs right on the border in the Otay Mountain Wilderness, and then below the border as well. But this is one of the species that, instead of seed banking, since you can't really bank acorns, we are kind of starting a living collection. So we've collected acorns at Otay Mountain. We have grown out a lot of acorns. You can see here, and then I believe we've given some to the Huntington, and we're working with the GCCO and looking at a lot of other institutions that hopefully will be taking more of these to just kind of have a safeguard of Quercus cedrosensis populations in case more threats and more things happen to the population here, which has lost a lot in the recent years. So here's us in the field collecting. We did a couple other collections this year in the desert. We were approved to do some of these collections. These are 4 listed, rare plant 4 listed species that were out in Anza Borrego Desert, Abutilon, Digitaria, it's a grass. And then we got a few more to do that were just not out this year because of the less than ideal rains. Hopefully they should be out now. It's been a great summer season of rains in the desert. And then we got a new truck, which is amazing. So I think this was half of the price of the truck, and specifically Otay Mountain the roads aren't that great, and it can, like a lot of the other collaborating institutions, also were able to purchase, or the funding was able to help them purchase new vehicles. It obviously just helps you get to places where a lot of these rare plants occur, right? So sometimes they're rare or they haven't been collected because they're hard to get to. So this is 4-wheel drive. It's got great clearance, so we can get to a lot of places. And then we also, as I mentioned before, purchased a lot of lab equipment. We're getting a new germinator and a backup generator for our seed bank as well. So thank you very much to CAPER. And then, last thing, we did some, one of the things that this funding helped us do is do these big rare plant collection expeditions. So we kind of looked at some of those geographical regions where there were a lot of species that hadn't been collected, in certain areas where we could get a lot. So a lot of the institutions got together, and we went out to Tahoe for one trip. We went out to Modoc for another one. And all of our different, experiences and botanical know-hows and things like that, we kind of put it all together, and we were able to do a lot of collections this year and get these rare plants into our seed banks. So here's up in Modoc in the very northeast corner of the state. So way up there, some beautiful incredible places that we got to go botanize and do some collections. You can see some belly botanizing going on in this photo. Really, I think this was like one of the small Eriogonums or Astragalus on that particular site. So that's it. Thanks to all the CNPS and people who did the lobbying. It's been a huge help. So the big takeaway here is collaboration and money and more collaboration, and you can get a lot done. So thank you.
All right, next up is Lupe, Peru, to talk about how we can build equity and inclusion through native gardening.
and I promise to be looking at you. Hello, everyone. So I just want to say thank you to all of the presenters. Oh my gosh, as a native plant enthusiast, I am just so happy to be hearing all of this information, and I feel truly hopeful. And on that last note of collaboration, let me start my presentation, which is about natives gardening, growing equity and inclusion in underrepresented communities. I'm close enough to the mic, right? Okay. So the question that I want to start with is, who can benefit from greater access to native plants? And the answers are not new. They are pretty much well known to us. Let's start with under-resourced communities. Okay? So we know that there are tremendous benefits to gardening, getting our hands in the soil. It's well documented. We reduce stress. We increase serotonin. Therefore, we increase happiness. And so I now think of gardening based on these benefits as a privilege that is not available to all communities, right? And so another answer to who can benefit from greater access to native gardening are urban deserts in our inner cities. That also is well documented and pretty much talked about in the news, where we hear about communities where there is no tree canopy and there's no tree cover. And so the impact of that is that it's a great impact. Besides lacking in comfort, right? Folks pay a higher energy bills. And when there is tree canopy, when there is the benefit of these beautiful trees in our neighborhood, again, there is reduced stress, and there is also a reduction in crime. Now, if that's not worth following up on, I don't know what is. And this information is well documented. I'm not presenting you with that information. I'm presenting you with the idea and the notions. And I'm raising these questions, and I'm going to be leaving you with questions and an invitation. All right. So native plants provide a vehicle for accessibility. Why is that? Well, they're ecologically friendly. They require fewer resources, so gardening can become more accessible to under-resourced communities. And why is that? Well, because there is less money that they have to spend on water, less money that they have to spend on pesticides, fertilizers, because these eco-friendly plants just don't require that, right? We don't have to coax them to grow. We don't have to beat them down with pesticides because they're in their native habitat, and therefore they can take better care of themselves than non-natives. So with natives, we can also support advancing equity. Simply because when we make these gardens and access to the soil available to these communities, we are allowing these communities to reap the benefits of the greater health benefits that the rest of us can possibly take for granted. And for some, and this is significant, I think it's pivotal, gardening can provide a greater sense of purpose. And this may just also be especially for retired communities, right? Or anyone who feels challenged. If we can give them a greater sense of purpose, then we've already raised their boat a little. We can beautify urban communities while building these gardening areas, and we can green our urban deserts. Another plus to gardening with natives is that we can advance our eco-awareness, and we can create a win-win for our fellow humans as well as our ecosystem. I apologize, I'm reading a lot because I changed my notes at the last minute, so I'm trying to do both but give you the information that I jotted down. So how do we create this win-win? We can grow when we provide the gardens to the community. It becomes a platform, an easy platform for an educational opportunity, right, around our ecosystem, water conservation, the use of less fertilizers, less pesticide use, as I've already said. By populating these urban sites with habitat, we benefit also our pollinators, our beneficial insects, and we provide bird food, songbird food, right? Who doesn't want more of the little critters singing us through our days? And all this while expanding native plant population. So I would like to leave you with the question of how do we facilitate the gift of gardening in under-resourced communities and share the gift and the benefits of gardening. So what's next? Who is already doing this? I know there are people out there, and I know there are many, many talks that are going to be happening here that touch on different aspects of this. So the question I'm leaving you this is, who is already doing this? Who is donating seeds, plants? Who is finding the garden sites to take these our gardening out? Who is organizing planting parties? So to share ideas, and here's the invitation that I'm leaving you with, please reach out. I would like to be a conduit for some level of organization of folks who are already doing this, who have the resources to share, and perhaps just, the resource might be labor or just collaboration. And here's my email address. So I extend this invitation. Let's explore possibilities. Thank you.
All right, next up, Leslie Parra is going to talk with us about turning the tides through Redwood rides. And please introduce all of yourselves as you come up.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. This is actually a partnership presentation, so you get a treat. 3 of us up here instead of 1. My name is Leslie Parra. I am the outreach manager for Save the Redwoods League. Many of you may be familiar with that organization, but I'll just give a quick intro. We protect old coastal redwoods and sequoia, old growth. We restore second growth, and most importantly, we were trying to connect all people to these beautiful places. And so this is a partnership project, and I'll let my partners introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Lucian Sonder. I'm the supervisor for outreach and volunteer programs at Golden Gate National Recreation Area.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rebecca Au, and I'm the volunteer and youth programs coordinator on Lucian's team.
So as I was saying, Redwood Rides is an outreach program, and our goal is to connect the under-resourced communities to these beautiful places, and by tackling the biggest barrier that we have, which is transportation. And through partnerships with community organizations and through Redwood parks, agencies, federal, regional, we connect kind of like a travel agent. Many of you may remember that. So we connect with communities and we talk to them about their needs and what they're looking for, what kind of meaningful experience they're looking for in a Redwood park. And so when this project started, I reached out to our partners, like right behind us in NPS, to see what they could offer the communities that are interested. So I'll let them share. And actually, let me click this over. I don't know if this, excuse me. Thank you. So as I was saying, this Redwood Rides launched in March of this year, and those are our goals, and I'll let them talk about community science.
Thanks, Leslie. I stand up here as a representative of the National Park Service, yes, but I also stand up here as a representative of my own community. I represent less than 2% of the permanent Asian American staff in the National Park Service. And I am a child of immigrants. I was also an immigrant myself, born in Vietnam. And English was not my first language. I was low income. I also was fed off of food stamps. So why does that matter? What Leslie mentioned before, we are trying to reach those communities. People who look like myself, who walked in my shoes, who are my family members. So when we were developing this program, those are the people that I had in mind. I had my ancestors in mind. I had my colleagues in mind, where we all share the passion of bringing the outdoors to these peoples. So the way that we did that was we developed guided nature walks with ecologists, biologists, scientists, much like yourselves, I am not an expert on native plants. I am a person who enjoys connecting people to national parks. So we partnered up with them and we developed this community science program that actually connects service and people to their national parks. Being as I'm a volunteer coordinator, we used iNaturalist to teach people in the communities how to use a device that's so powerful, that's in their hands. Everybody has one. I'm sure most people have a phone or a camera or a device that can take photos. My own mom, she takes photos every day of wildlife and flowers and plants that she finds beautiful. She didn't know that that's actually something you can do to help our planet. So through this program, we teach people how to use iNaturalist. Then they upload their photos, and people like yourselves help them identify and find out more information. We also use songs, games, dance. We also connect people to the things that bring them joy. So when we bring them out to Muir Woods, which is where I work, we do all of these activities so that they can enjoy their national parks, but also bring that data back into the hands of people who can help make a difference with climate change, with access, with all the things that we enjoy in this world connected to native plants.
So the support that from Save the Redwoods League has reduced barriers for our priority communities to visit Muir Woods by providing transportation, as your talk was talking about. The park is deliberately allocating park resources and designing a volunteer program to offer skill building in community science for these community members. As we know, parks are a great place to learn and give back and build community together. Our community members that are part of Redwood Rides learn that they can contribute directly to science through their volunteer observations, and we hope that in the end this builds a sense of stewardship and support. They also develop, hopefully a skill, a hobby that, using iNaturalist, that they might be able to take back to their own neighborhoods and continue on after volunteering with us. We're teaching them skills to observe nature, identify plants and animals. And we also have bilingual park rangers who speak Spanish and Cantonese, who help be a bridge for these communities, many of whom are first-time park visitors, and act as a welcoming presence and being able to speak to people in their native languages. So the outreach and volunteer team at Golden Gate has an overall goal of diversifying our visitors and volunteer force. According to the park's long-range interpretive plan, our priority audiences are Black and Indigenous people of color, youth and their families, low-income people, seniors, and people with disabilities. And so far through this program, we've worked with community groups from these backgrounds, such as San Francisco State students, Latino outdoors groups, seniors from Senior Center in San Francisco, where most of them speak Cantonese, group from this area called Saved by Nature, and the Marin Multicultural Center.
And just to wrap it up, we put our names and email. If you are a member of a community that would love to go and explore Redwood Park, please reach out to myself for a Redwood Ride. And I've also have my colleagues' email there as well. Thank you so much for having us. Have a great afternoon.
We are also hiring park guides who speak Cantonese, Spanish, English, or any other language to come and work at the Golden Gate National Recreation Area.
Next up is my colleague David Magney to talk about the California Botanist Certification Program.
All right, thank you. I'm here to talk about a program that we started in 2016. We actually have been considering it for many, many years. And as an environmental consultant for most of my adult life since the mid-'80s, I've had lots of experience doing CEQA, environmental assessments assessing impacts to the environment, particularly plants. So first, I want to talk about what is a professional botanist, and that is one who gets paid, has skills in botany, and they get paid in some capacity to do that work. And so a botanist is a biologist specializing in the study of plants, and a consulting botanist provides services to more than one client, either as a self-employed person or as working for a consulting firm. There are many botany professions. Basically, if you work with plants, you are a professional in one of these areas. What's not listed in there is like the consulting botanist. It's a fairly new field that started when we have environmental laws like NEPA and CEQA. There we go. So over this time, since we don't have a professional organization supporting us, we have a number of issues that have been identified through our work. And one is a basic conflict of interest. Most biologists that get into this field are conservationists. We care about the resource. But when we have a client, they have a specific interest, a specific outcome they want. They need a permit. They need to move on with their project, but the plants or wildlife are in their way. And so the employer or client has a specific outcome, results they want, and the employer pays the botanist. Therefore is the conflict. But we are scientists, so we want to always stay factual. Botanists are the most part, as I mentioned, conservationists, and some clients require that we sign confidentiality agreements. Now, I think that's an abuse of the purpose of a confidentiality agreement, because that's only to protect trade secrets. The biological resources are not trade secrets. In fact, wildlife belongs to the public. Right. Plants too. So one of the other issues is there may be a lack of local knowledge of the local flora. We go to school, some of us. There are actually very good, high qualified consulting botanists that didn't get a formal education, but they still know the flora. But they may not know the area that they are hired to work in. And so many of them do not actually, not familiar with that local flora, and they may not consult with local experts because it might not be in their budget. So therefore, they may not be able to actually identify all the plants that are in the area or know which ones are of concern. They may have a lack of training. It's actually difficult to get formal education in botany now. Very, very few schools actually have a botany program. And then, do they really teach you the skills that you need as a consultant? The answer is no. You get some basic skills, but for the most part, we learn on the job. And few botany programs remain in California, I just said that. Okay, all right. So the lack of experience is one. Many of the projects that are worked on by the consultants, the people with experience are elevated to higher level position, and they don't do the field work. So we send out the junior level, so this is not always hitting, okay. Those knowledgeable are promoted to management, therefore we send out the lower level or experienced people to do the field work, and so they may miss things. So then we have a lack of accountability. Who do we report to? We report to our, why isn't it going forward? Can I get, there we go, okay. So no professional botanist society or association until now, and I'm going to have to jump way ahead. We have a code of ethics that we've developed. Sorry, this is not, where do I need to point this to get it to actually, that way? Okay, all right. Got to press it hard, all right. So I'm just going to ask for, there's a whole set of web pages that describe this in detail. But one of the things that a professional organization such as what we're developing here provides the professional with training and certification and tools and education so that we can do a better job as consultants. And we have also established ethical standards for which we follow through a code of ethics. And then there's always a discipline component. All right. So with the botanist certification, it is to provide that support to the consulting botanist and to foster or basic minimum practices that we do, and then we establish a higher level of reporting and assessments, which then conserves our flora. And the objective is to get as many people as certified as we can. We have 3 levels of certification. One is the consulting botanist at the highest level, and the field botanist, and then we have a new associate level botanist. And the results, we just had a certification exam. Well, the only way to determine who's really qualified is through examination. Your resume doesn't matter, what education doesn't matter, except that, of course, helps you be a good botanist. And right now we have 40 people that are certified that have passed the exams over the years, and we just had exams yesterday, and so we're probably going to add probably another 10 to that. So go to your, let's see, this should show me in a second. There we go. Go to the CNPS website, type in on the search level botanist certification. It'll take you to a number of pages, describes the whole program and what you need to do to be able to become certified and how you can support that. It is targeting people with experience, at least 5 to 7 years. So, and I'm available certainly for any questions. Oh, how many certified botanists are here right now? Stand up. All right, great. And next time, I want to see twice that many. All right, thank you.
All right, continuing our career discussions, we're going to hear about consulting botanists with Justin Wood.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Justin Wood. I work with Aspen Environmental Group. I'm a botanist. Perfect timing to follow David's talk because I'm going to talk about a very similar topic. I've been doing this about 20 years, and you learn a lot going through this process. You learn what you have to do to please a client, which is go out and do a survey and find rare plants. But there's also a lot of opportunities beyond what you're required to do that we really need to be doing to further our knowledge about floristics in California. So we just heard from David. This is just we're going to go over it real quick, but a consulting botanist is somebody that's trained to look for rare plants primarily. You're hired by a client to go out and do those, and the results of those surveys are used for CEQA and NEPA analysis and maybe permit applications. The main ways that we can contribute more, and I'm going to encourage everybody that's in here to do these things, are to coordinate and collaborate. Attend conferences such as this with CNPS. Attend your Northern California Botanist or Southern California Botanist symposiums. Be members of those organizations. Reach out to agencies. Coordinate with other consulting botanists. So I do a lot of work in the southern half of the state, and we recently had a project in Trinity County in the northern half of the state, well outside of my area of expertise. So we reached out to a bunch of local experts, and they led our special status species surveys. They're qualified to do that. I'm not. So it was a little bit outside of my comfort zone. Report your observations. CNDDB is obviously the main place we should be submitting these results so that information gets out to everybody in this room. Species observations should be reported in CalFlora, iNaturalist, or any of the other platforms like that. And I think most importantly, vouchered specimens. So making a plant specimen, submitting it to your local herbarium is extremely important. We're describing new species, we're describing new ranges of species, new weeds within the state, lots of different things like that, using those vouchered specimens. And finally, peer-reviewed publications. So if you find something significant, absolutely publish it in your local peer-reviewed journal so that everybody else can hear about what you found. And yeah, it's just a great way for everybody to find out what you're up to. So in the Trinity County example, we were doing surveys for a transmission line right-of-way project. They needed to widen the right-of-way to reduce fire risk. So we coordinated with the Shasta Trinity National Forest, BLM, CDFW, and local botanists, as I mentioned. All of our survey results were reported to CNDDB, and during our surveys, we did a lot of observations in iNaturalist. Personally, that's the platform I use, but I encourage you to use any of the different platforms that are available. After our local experts went out and did the field work, I got to go out, map vegetation, do jurisdictional delineation, and really do a QA/QC inspection of their surveys. Go visit all the sites, make sure their identifications were correct, things like that. So during my time, which was 15 days in the field, I collected 255 specimens during that time. And there's a publication coming soon. So this is just an example of my iNaturalist observations for Trinity County. All the little squares there are where we got to go as part of this project. It was nearly 300 miles of transmission line right of way, so we got to go to a lot of remote areas that a lot of people haven't had the chance to visit. And because of the work that we got to do, we got to find a lot of new records for the county. So of those 255 specimens that I collected, this was in 2020, 35 of those were new county records for Trinity County. So Trinity County has been collected pretty heavily. About 19,000 specimens have been collected there. But in 15 days, 255 specimens, we found 35 new county records. 3 of those had a California Rare Plant rank of 2B. About 20 of them were native species, and the rest were invasive species. Several new invasive records for the county. So I want to encourage everybody that's a consulting botanist to go beyond what you're required to do as part of your job and find these things, get them out there, make vouchered specimens, and publish your findings. So thank you guys.
All right, okay, next up we're going to go with Rosemary Frederick. Thank you, Rosemary. Effects of Siberian wheatgrass on native grasses and restoration.
Thank you so much. I got a little sneak peek of what I'm going to talk about. So thank you all so much for being here. My name is Rosemary Frederick. I'm a master's student at the University of Nevada, Reno. And so we're going to head east a little bit and talk about native grasses in Eastern California and the Great Basin. Great. So let's do a brief background on some challenges to grassland restoration in the Great Basin. So there we have this cycle of wildfire and cheatgrass, where you have drought, wildfire, cheatgrass having competitive phenology, and then that cycle repeats itself. So that, along with the effects of climate change and drought conditions, make it very difficult to conduct restoration, especially from seed. So here we have on the left typical seedling mortality in a Great Basin seeding event, with 80 to 90% of seedlings either failing to germinate or dying after establishment. So to combat this, a lot of land managers turn to non-native cultivars, just to have something out there that does end up surviving. And the one that is most often used in that region is Siberian wheatgrass, or Agaparra frigile, and it's chosen for its ability to be competitive against cheatgrass and to have grazing tolerance. So here we see on the left a typical before and after of Siberian wheatgrass and native grass seeding. So you can see it's really just a cheatgrass landscape on the left, and then on the right we have lots of bunch grasses, which is great, but they're all Siberian wheatgrass. So this, along with its more famous cousin, crested wheatgrass, make up about 2/3 of non-native cultivars in BLM seedings since the 1940s. So to dive a little bit deeper into that, this is a graph of the percent Agaparra and fragile in seeding events with the BLM since the 1940s. So we can see it's really increased, especially since the 90s. And we do see a slight decrease in recent years, but that may be due to weird digitization of field office data. So that might not actually be real. And we do see in the literature, there is a good amount of literature suggesting that both crested wheatgrass and Siberian wheatgrass do have negative effects on the ability for native seeds to establish and be successful. But there are no addition series designs. And by that I mean we don't know at what point that happens. Is that any of this seed, or is that a certain level of this seed? that it takes to have these detrimental effects. So I asked, how will the presence of Siberian wheatgrass in native seed mixes affect the emergence and growth of native seeds? So to do this, I used 4 native grasses: bottlebrush squirreltail, Great Basin wild rye, blue bunch wheatgrass, and sandbird's bluegrass, which are all sort of representative members of these Great Basin native grass communities that are often included in these seed mixes. And then I did an addition series, seed mix design, where I increased the level of Agropyra and fragile based on actual BLM seeding rates taken from that digital library. And then I planted these into a bunch of different greenhouse pots, and half of these were, there was cheatgrass added as well. So that was to see whether or not Siberian wheatgrass does sort of have this like, this detrimental effect to cheatgrass. Like, does it suppress cheatgrass? And so what did we find? Generally, yes, native biomass decreased with higher Siberian wheatgrass biomass. So as you add Siberian wheatgrass, this is in the pots without cheatgrass, native biomass also decreases. And this makes sense. We know that competition exists, and there's nothing special about Siberian wheatgrass that allows it to be not competitive. But interestingly, we didn't really see this in the cheatgrass pots. And the reason that I don't have a graph up here is because we really didn't have enough emergence of anything to get any kind of data. So that tells us that the competitive ability of cheatgrass is so much stronger in the rates that we actually see it in the field than anything that Siberian wheatgrass is doing. So that's interesting. And when we look at densities specifically, so here we have just species counts, densities of Siberian wheatgrass versus each of the 4 native grasses that I seeded. And it really depends on the species, how much it cares. So we see Lamus cineris and Poa secunda really care about how much Siberian wheatgrass is there, and then the other 2, not quite as much. So in summary, Siberian wheatgrass can indeed reduce the size and density of these native grass seedlings. And some native grasses appear to be more susceptible than others. But the presence of cheatgrass really dominated these pots. And again, we used the amount of cheatgrass that is actually seen in field sites. So that number is sort of taken from soil samples of a certain amount of soil, and then all the cheatgrass seeds were counted in there. So that is like a field accurate measurement. So there's no real evidence that Siberian wheatgrass seedlings were able to suppress the cheatgrass, as is suggested sometimes. So for managers, they should expect some competition at this seedling stage, wherein Siberian wheatgrass is planted with native species. And a paired field study is ongoing, just to look at those longer-term effects and in actual field conditions. So thank you so much to my department, to my collaborators, to my advisor, and to the rest of my lab mates. And thank you so much for listening.
All right, Joanne.
Homer Simpson was going to be the surprise. My name is Joanna Heidi. I am a senior environmental scientist and the new permitting specialist with California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Native Plant Program. Today, this mic is not for tall people. Today, my talk focuses on understanding California Endangered Species Act permit requirements for rare, threatened, and endangered species. So navigating permit needs for rare, threatened, and endangered species in California can be really challenging. Those of you who are working with native plants in California may be asking yourself, I think I found a CESA-listed plant, or I want to work with CESA-listed plants. Do I need a permit? So the goal of this presentation is to really summarize our main permit mechanisms for CESA-listed plants, focusing on voucher collection permits and scientific, educational, or management permits. So the first resource, which is maintained by the California Natural Diversity Database, is the state and federally listed Endangered, Threatened, and Rare Plants of California list, which provides information on the 222 plant taxa that are state listed and fully protected by the Fish and Game Commission.
State listing is governed by CISA for threatened and endangered plants and the Native Plant Protection Act for rare plants. There are a few things to keep in mind when you're referencing this list. The first is to be aware of the state status. This provides abbreviations for whether the plant is state listed threatened, endangered, rare, or is a candidate species. One of the most frequent questions we're asked is whether or not plants that are listed on the CNPS inventory of rare plants require a permit, and not all rare plants are CISA listed. So it's a good idea to look at this list, and if it's a state-listed rare plant, that would trigger the need for a permit. This list also provides information on the federal status, which may indicate whether or not you need to consult with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on additional permitting needs. And it is maintained quarterly, so keep an eye on that date, and so you are looking at the most recent version. CDFW offers 4 main plant permit mechanisms. The first is a 2081A voucher collection permit, and these are required to collect listed species for ID or voucher specimen purposes. Then we also work with 2081A scientific, educational, or management permits. These authorize take, possession, import, or export for scientific, educational, or management activities. These are also called memorandums of understanding. CDFW also offers these new restoration management permits, or RMPs, and these consolidate take authorizations for voluntary habitat projects. And then we also have the 2081B, which is an incidental take permit, and these authorize incidental take or possession in conjunction with otherwise lawful activities. I'm going to be focusing on these first 2 permit mechanisms. So voucher collection permit is the primary purpose is for plant survey and collection. Plants often need to be collected in order to be identified. So it's a really good idea to have one of these if you're a consultant or a plant survey, and if there's any chance of take or possession of a state-listed species during the course of your survey or sampling activities. The best part is that they're no cost, they're valid for 3 years, and they're issued to you as an individual and not your affiliation. The annual data that is submitted through CNDB also helps CDFW better understand statewide population dynamics. We have applications available on our website. We also have paper copies available at our table in the exhibit hall, and we can answer any questions you have about whether or not these voucher collection permits are applicable to the kind of work that you're doing. We also have these scientific, educational, or management permits, and these really serve to support research, conservation, and recovery of listed species. They're proposal-based, they're no cost, and they require annual reporting. Consultations are available, and we really recommend that you start the process early, at least about 3 months before you require needing that permit. The guidelines for those proposals are also available on our website. Some examples of 2081A permitted projects include research propagation and reintroduction of Catalina Island mountain mahogany, seed germination studies of San Fernando Valley spineflower, and demographic studies of Tiburon mariposa lily. We also work with botanic gardens, research institutions, and land managers on seed banking, propagation, genetics, and other research activities. For more resources, please visit our website. Everything I've talked about here today is on our website, and you can also email us at nativeplants@wildlife.ca.gov or come visit our table in the exhibit hall. Thank you very much.
All right, let's hear about rare plant surveys in Bishop Field Office, BLM. Welcome, Sean Carson.
Hello, everyone. Well, thanks for having me. I'll be talking about rare plant surveys in the BLM Bishop Field Office. First I'll talk about the goals and the methods we use to achieve those goals. So first we sat down with BLM Botanist. We discussed their sensitive species list, and we decided on which ones were the most threatened and which species haven't been seen in recent years, so element occurrences that haven't been visited recently. And then from that target list, we would provide status assessments and updates on these locations, and we would also kind of expand outwards on these element occurrences and kind of see if they have grown or shrunk in population size. And when possible, we would make conservation seed collections. Some of these species from the list haven't been seed banked before at all, so they'd be new to a seed bank, and some of them just haven't been seed banked in recent history. So the methods we used were ArcGIS and field maps. So we imported the target data set, and then we also created our own data set where we collected data that's similar to CNDDB, so your location, habitat, threats, all that. And then in unison with that, we also wanted to track our movement and survey effort over the landscape. So we had survey lines and then no target points when we didn't find the species. So to kind of like talk about why we did that method is previously a lot of these elements occurrence are really old occurrences, so they have inaccurate spatial data. If they were before 1983, they didn't have GPS for civilians. Prior to 2000, you did, but it was scrambled for national security. So a lot of inaccurate spatial data. They also didn't have a lot of survey effort data associated with it, so tracks over the landscape. And then you fast forward to present day, where we have a plethora of resources at our fingertips to collect a number of data. We can have attribute and spatial data associated together. We can have sub-meter accuracy. We can do collection of negative data, so areas we searched but didn't find it. Oops. So kind of look at a real-life example from last year. We surveyed Perea-Vega, which is a rare rock daisy in Owens Valley. It's endemic to limestone cliffs. So we visited locations here, so you can see the triangle with the Perea-Vega, the target point. The purple line is our survey, and then the green circles, which are pretty small, are where we found the plant. So not only was the point inaccurate, it was pretty far, a couple hundred meters off. And also we found a lot more plants at these locations. And with these kind of high resolution points, we can overlay a bunch of map layers with this, including topography and aspect. And this really kind of helps land managers hone in on exactly where their rare plants are, and in case they want to build suitable habitat models. And our surveys over the last 2 years, we visited 54 occurrences, and of those 54 occurrences, 36 occurrences had our target species. So there was a lot of occurrences that we visited and didn't find the species. 18 unique taxa, and we made 22 seed collections. And over those 2 years, we've surveyed 208 acres of area. So we'll continue this for one more year and kind of continue to help BLM manage their sensitive species. So thank you.
All right, we're down to our final 2 talks. We're going to totally shift gears now. We're going to talk about flower mimicry with Barnali Ghosh. Barnali?
Oh. So, a few months into the pandemic, I woke up like this. So this is the journey, story of my journey to becoming a plant person. There's been lots of apologies for not being plant persons. So bear with me. It's going to take a little bit of a detour and come back to plants, I promise. So I woke up like this, but not exactly. And that's because what I was doing was the social media challenge that I heard about a few months into quarantine called the Getty Museum Challenge, where folks were being asked to recreate artworks with things they had at home. And over the course of the year, I did 50 unfaithful recreations. And for me, they were a pandemic diary. I used them to capture all the pandemic feelings, like the anxiety of essential workers stepping out into our cities, the isolation of staying at home and of missing friends. Those are all the lamps in our house. When I finally got my hands on precious materials like toilet paper, I put them on my head. So I use these recreations to respond to events that acquired significance even during a pandemic. I mourned the women in Atlanta who were lost to anti-Asian hate. And I found inspiration in the renewed movement for Black lives after the murder of George Floyd. And I tried to express the familiar pain of being an immigrant far from the homeland when Kolkata was hit by a cyclone. Through all of this, my body and my face were often at the center of my art. Not an easy task for someone who grew up in India, being body shamed and facing street harassment. I painted it, I taped it, I put it in all kinds of unnatural positions. I attempted a nude. I just put some almost gone bananas to good use. Anyway, suddenly I couldn't just walk around anymore without thinking about recreation. So remember the day of the orange sky? I woke up and did my version of Hopper's Morning Sun. And later that year, when I had to get major surgery, the day after my surgery, in the hospital, I recreated American Gothic. Now, that should give you an idea of where my head was during the pandemic. So on the day that I got my vaccine, I was feeling so hopeful, so excited, so positive, and all I could think about was what recreation am I going to do to mark this moment? And I had this idea, so as soon as I got home, I put on my outfit that I had in mind, I did my makeup, I set up my tripod, I put my phone on it, I set a 10-second timer, and I struck a pose. I ran back to check the photo. It was a hot April day, and I must have run back 10, 20, 30 times before I found the perfect pose to recreate the California poppy, our gorgeous state flower. So I posted this to the California Native Plant Society Facebook group, where I had lurked for over a decade. And I waited anxiously, hoping that the moderators would approve my photo of a brown immigrant woman dressed as a native flower. I don't know if Judy or Arvind are in this room, but thank you, because when they finally did, it got a huge response, thousands of likes, hundreds of comments. Something about these images resonated with others too. Now, it happened to be California Native Plant Week, so I challenged myself to do one a day. I embodied the lupin, whose purples turned to pink when pollinated. I did these baby blue eyes that I found just a couple of blocks from home. I did the matiliha poppy, or the fried egg flower. And I tried to capture the deep colors of the California peony and loved the complexity of recreating the patterns of the Douglas iris. And that was the start of my current series of self-portraits, where I recreate California native flowers using saris and fabrics from South Asia with poses inspired by Odissi dance. I'm happy to share that the project is ongoing, and I've done over 24 recreations. And what started as a social media project has been up at my neighborhood coffee shop and in galleries. Earlier this year, I brought the joy of native plants to a talk I gave at the KQED Live Studios. And because of requests from the group and from others, I created a 2022 calendar and was able to raise over $2,000 each for CNPS and for the Saugariya Land Trust. Which is our indigenous-led Ohlone organization. So if you're interested in the 2023 calendars, I'm going to do the same thing this year. It's probably going to be all new images. Please come talk to me or sign up on my website, bernaligosh.art. Now, though my background is in landscape architecture, I spent years feeling alienated by the language of native plant culture and the use of words like exotic and invasive. Through this project, I'm finally building my own relationship with native plants and flowers, learning the importance of native plants to biodiversity and the health of our ecosystem. This project has also allowed me to connect with folks like Amy Patton. She's not in the room right now. I really wanted to give her a shout out, but if you know who she is, she works for CNPS and is an amazing photographer, and she shared with me many photos, including this one of the globe lily. It has also allowed me to rediscover local treasures, like the Regional Park's Botanical Garden in Tilden Park, where I found this native bleeding heart. Even now, the fragrance of jasmine transports me to the homeland. Sorry. I want to be able to go on a walk, see our indigenous flowers, and feel like I'm home. Thank you.
Okay, I'm still crying a little bit. Okay, next up, Christopher Cosma to talk about Beyond Milkweed for Monarchs.
All right, well, that was just delightful, and we really should have ended on that because, unfortunately, I'm going to have to put a damper on this mood right now and let you know that just 3 months ago, the IUCN officially listed the migratory monarch butterfly as an endangered species. And part of what spurred this decision is that in 2020, the western monarch population that overwinters here in California had declined by over 99% since the 1980s. Let me go back. And part of this decline can be explained by the famous relationship between the monarch butterfly and its host plant, the milkweeds. You see, the monarch butterfly is a host plant specialist, and that means that its caterpillars can only develop on milkweed plants. And we all know that native milkweeds are much better. And it's getting harder and harder for the monarch butterfly to find fresh patches of its native milkweeds in a country that's losing a football field of natural habitat every 30 seconds. And that's why we're all encouraged to plant native milkweeds in our yards and gardens, or even pots on our balconies like I've done here, because the monarch needs all the help it can get. Wrong way. But the monarch butterfly is a poster child for a much larger problem. The insect order Lepidoptera, which includes butterflies and moths, is one of the most diverse groups of insects. In California alone, we have around 240 butterfly species. And studies have found that their abundance is declining by almost 2% per year, including species that are much more at risk than the monarch butterfly. We don't even have good data for the around 5,000 moth species in California, but it's very likely that they're experiencing similar declines. And part of the reason behind these declines is that the same host plant specialization that we see for the monarch butterfly is true of the majority of butterfly and moth species. I've been analyzing a statewide data set detailing the interactions between native California plants and Lepidoptera, and I found that 43% of Lepidoptera species in California have just one host plant, like the monarch butterfly. And 73% of Lepidoptera species in California have 3 or fewer host plants. So just like the monarch needs milkweed, the thousands of other threatened butterfly and moth species in California need their specific host plants. And analyzing this data set, I've arrived at 3 important considerations to protect entire communities of threatened butterflies and moths in California. Number 1, we have to plant native hosts and nectar plants. So caterpillars feed on their host plants to gain the energy they need to transform into their beautiful adult stage. But in that adult stage, they also need to be sipping nectar from their native nectar plants in order to sustain the energy they need to survive and reproduce. And I found that the same native plants will not necessarily satisfy both the caterpillar and the adult stage. Lepidoptera use a different subset of native host plants that they then visit for nectar as adults. So in order to support the entire Lepidoptera life cycle, we need to be planting these discrete host and nectar plants. Number 2, we have to prioritize the most important plant species. There are over 6,500 native plant species in California, and I found that just 32% of host plant species and 9% of nectar plant species support a full 90% of Lepidoptera species. So this relatively small percentage of native hosts and nectar plants are the ones that are doing the most work out there, and these are the ones we need to be prioritizing for Lepidoptera conservation efforts. All right, finally, we have to consider geographic variation in species and interactions. As we all know, California is a huge and very diverse state. And the best plants for Lepidoptera in one part of the state are not going to be the same in another part. And we can look again to our friend the monarch to emphasize this point. There are over 15 species of native milkweeds occurring in different regions of California. And I know most of you are aware that it's really important to use your local species because not doing so risks confusing monarch migration patterns, among other things. And it's in part due to these targeted milkweed planting efforts that in 2021, the western monarch population rebounded almost 100-fold compared to that 2020 plummet that I presented at the beginning. But it's not just the monarch that's at risk today, and following these 3 points to protect entire communities of threatened Lepidoptera in California, I've created an app called the Butterfly Net. This is a web application that you can access at the address posted there. It works best on a computer or tablet, but you can also use the QR code on your phone here. And this app analyzes the complex networks of interactions between butterflies in California and moths in California native plants across the entire state in order to help you find the right plants for the right places to support California's incredible and threatened butterfly and moth diversity. Thank you.
Wow, could there be a better testimony for the fact that it really takes all kinds and all people to fulfill this mission? So let's give it up for our lightning talk presenters today. Thank you. All right, a lot of fun begins at 5:30, so catch your breath and join us for the cocktail reception and the poster session and all the activities that are about to begin in a few minutes.